Okay, guys, I have a special request for you today. Please stop calling me ma'am. You're probably asking yourself, but Kim, I'm trying to be more polite when speaking English. Why can't I call you ma'am? Well, let's talk about culturally appropriate forms of address and how to be polite when addressing someone in a position of authority or somebody that you respect. So let's get started. Now, in American English, the word ma'am is generally reserved for someone who's significantly older than you. I'm in my 30s, so some people might feel like I'm significantly older than them if they're a teenager or in their early 20s. But the reality is, until you hit about 40 or even 50, you don't really want to hear somebody calling you ma'am. It's not really that kind because it basically is suggesting you look old. Okay, so I have a few gray hairs, but I still don't want somebody to call me ma'am. And does that mean that I want you to call me miss? No, I don't want you to call me miss either. This is because the word miss or ma'am in American English is pretty much only used when you're trying to get somebody's attention. For example, if they dropped something and you want to signal to them that they need to come pick up their purse or their pen or whatever they dropped, a piece of paper, you're going to say, hey, miss, or ma'am, you forgot something, right? You're going to call out to them with this phrase. So you only really use miss and ma'am to refer to people that you don't know. The same thing goes for sir. You'll hear people use the word sir when you're in a service situation where you're maybe being addressed by somebody who works at a hotel. They might call out to you with sir because they don't know your name. But in general, the word sir or even lady for women is really only used in really formal situations and only when you don't know somebody's name. I don't think I've ever been called lady by a native English speaker because lady generally makes me think of Lady Diana and other royal family members in Britain. If you're traveling in the United States and you go to the South in the United States, you will hear people use miss and ma'am more commonly because they sound a little more polite. But if you're in the cities or the more urban areas of the United States, you're unlikely to hear people use miss and ma'am or sir very frequently. So it's really important to understand that even if you're trying to be polite, using these words signals that you're a little uncomfortable and a little too formal for the situation. So now let's talk about titles, right? So you're probably asking me, well, what about the titles when I'm writing an email to somebody or I'm addressing someone I don't know? So basically in English, we use Mr. for all men of all ages, right? When you don't know somebody. It's much less common these days to put Mr. on an email or even a letter to somebody unless you're writing to someone like Mr. President or you're trying to address a really senior professor or a CEO of a company and you really want to show respect them. It's much less common to use Mr. in American business culture. The same thing goes for Miss, Ms., or Mrs. Let's talk about the differences between them. Miss is generally used for someone who's about 18 years of age or younger. And that's why now people tend to use Ms. for all women of all ages for various reasons. Many women today decide not to take their husband's last name when they get married. The only time you're going to use Mrs., which is an abbreviation for MISSUS, Mrs., only time you use that is when you know they've taken their husband's last name. But you really don't know today if somebody's married, if they took their husband's last name, if they're divorced, if they're widowed. So the best option in all of these situations, if the person is older than 18 years old, is to use the word Ms., MS, Ms. And that means both married women and unmarried women. So you can use it for all kinds of women and it's still a polite and appropriate thing to say. But like I said earlier, we don't really use these forms of address except when you're addressing an invitation to somebody for a wedding or something really serious. So now let's talk about a couple of other titles. Let's talk about the title doctor, DR, doctor. Now, we generally only refer to someone as doctor if they are a medical doctor or sometimes if they have a science Ph.D., especially on invitations, like I mentioned earlier. But in general, even if somebody has a Ph.D. in literature or languages or sociology, we don't really refer to that person as doctor. If you're in a class with this person, you're more likely to call them professor or even refer to them by their first name. It's more common to refer to professors by their first name, and I'll talk to you about that in just a moment. But doctor is generally reserved for medical doctors, and you will hear adults address other adults around the same age as doctor, or they might not just say their name whatsoever. They'll just talk to them without using a name. Another title that is very commonly used and you hear a lot in the news is president, right? We often refer to President Obama, President Bush, President Trump. You refer to them by their title because this is a signal of respect for their office that they're holding. And you'll still hear people say president to people who are no longer the president, or they say former president. But generally, when you're referring to someone of this high level governmental office, you'll hear people refer to them with their title. Similarly, the military have their own rules for address. You will hear people say yes sir, yes ma'am, and that kind of thing in the military. I am not familiar with the military, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, except to say that you will hear people referred to by general or sergeant or things like that, even in formal situations, because this is a title that they've earned, and this is often used on invitations and sometimes in writing, but really still not that common in everyday life to address a military person by their title. The thing that it's really important to understand is that these different titles help you understand a little more about our culture, and that's why I talked about it as culturally appropriate forms of address. In other languages, you use the forms of address in order to show respect for somebody who's more senior than you or older than you, or someone that you just want to show some level of respect to. This is really important to understand, that even though we don't use these forms of address in order to show respect for somebody else, you can show it using more polite language, more polite grammar structures, just the language that you're going to use around somebody. You won't use the casual language that you're using with your friends, with somebody that you're trying to show respect to. So that brings me to talking a little bit about teachers and professors. I see so many non-native speakers refer to their teachers like me as teacher, and this is really not common in American culture because I'm not really my title. I do teach English and I have had the profession of teacher, but I really am not defining myself as a teacher for always and ever like you would with president or a professor, something that really consumes more of your time. I teach and I am a teacher, but I don't really get referred to by my job title. You wouldn't say that to somebody who's an engineer or to somebody who is a house cleaner. You're not going to refer to them by their title. So even though you're trying to be really polite by referring to your English teachers as teacher, it's actually a signal that you're not a native speaker and you're not that comfortable with the culture, because teacher is something that you hear little kids say when they're 5 or 6 years old and they're calling for their teacher, teacher, teacher. So I always try to encourage people to stop referring to adult teachers as teacher. I know it's a sign of respect, but it's just not that common in my culture. The same thing goes for professor and instructor, and there's a little distinction here. You will hear the word professor referred to a Ph.D. tenured professor at a university. Usually you call your professor professor when you're in undergrad, not when you're in graduate school. When you're in graduate school, you're considered equals because you're studying at this higher level. So you usually refer to your college professors in graduate school by their first name. This can be a little uncomfortable for you if you're not used to it, but just pay attention to what your other classmates and colleagues are doing and follow suit, follow what they're doing. The other reason we don't always refer to a college professor as professor is not every PhD is a professor. This is a special job role that you earn after years and years and years of working in the university system. It's too complicated to talk about here. Many people who teach you in the college environment are actually instructors. That's their official job title. And you wouldn't refer to somebody as an instructor. It sounds weird. So generally, you just want to listen to what other students are doing and respect that. It's okay if you know they have a PhD to call them doctor, but some people don't have a PhD. They have a JD or they have an MBA or something like that. So I would just listen to what your classmates are doing and do the same thing. It's easier to just follow the lead of somebody else. It's also perfectly okay to ask somebody how they would like you to refer to them, because this is showing respect for them and so that you can figure out what your relationship is, and then it's easier going forward. I know I've been through the same thing when I was living in different cultures is because different forms of address are more appropriate between people of different backgrounds. I had to tell people to please stop referring to me with the more polite form of address because it just made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't feel like I deserved this extra respect, and I wanted to be seen as an equal. So I hope this helps you understand the culturally appropriate forms of address that are most common in American culture. If you have any questions, please be sure to leave a comment below the video. I'm really happy to clarify any doubts because I know this can be really confusing. Once again, I'm Kim from EnglishWithKim.com. I am your guide to the essential conversation skills you need to sound more natural in English. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Have a good one. Goodbye.